I'm Sylvia, 24 female. I'm a newly licensed architect, living in a city that feels both overwhelmingly large and refreshingly anonymous. For the past 5 years, my entire world has been consumed by blueprints, scale models, and sleepless nights fueled by cheap coffee and sheer determination. It was all supposed to culminate in one perfect, triumphant day, my university graduation. But that day became the catalyst that finally shattered the flawless family portrait my parents had spent a lifetime painting. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Growing up, our house was less of a home and more of a museum exhibit for my mother's impeccable taste. My mother, Olive, an interior designer with a client list of local socialites, had curated every inch of our lives with the same meticulous, detached precision she applied to her projects. Our walls were a sterile gallery white, the furniture was sculptural and uncomfortable, and every decorative object sat in its designated spot, never to be moved. My father, Darren, a financial advisor, ensured the numbers always added up to support this lifestyle of aesthetic perfection. Together, they were the architects of the Morgan family image, successful, elegant, and enviably perfect. And in this perfect family, there were two daughters. There was the masterpiece, and there was the foundation. My younger sister, Serafina, was the masterpiece. 2 years my junior, she was effortlessly charming, beautiful in a way that seemed both natural and highly produced, and had an intuitive grasp of social dynamics that I, with my head always buried in books, could never comprehend. Her life was a performance, and her stage was social media. My parents poured resources into her brand, funding professional photo shoots, designer clothes for her outfit of the day posts, and trips to picturesque locations to create content. They spoke of her follower count with the same reverence that other parents might use for academic awards. Serafina's job was to be seen, to be admired, and to reflect the family's success back to the world. She was brilliant at it. I, on the other hand, was the foundation. I was quiet, studious, and practical. My achievements were the sturdy, unseen support beams of the family's grand structure. When I earned a scholarship to one of the country's top architecture programs, my parents hosted a dinner party. They didn't toast to my hard work, they toasted to the Morgan family's legacy of excellence. My grueling all-nighters, my passion for structural integrity and sustainable design, all of it was melted down and recast into another brick in the family facade. I was praised not for who I was, but for what my accomplishments added to their image. An architect in the family, my father would boom to his colleagues at cocktail parties. Sylvia has always been so diligent, takes after me with that work ethic. The implication was clear. My success was a product of his genetics and my mother's curated environment. My own agency in the matter was irrelevant. The dynamic became painfully clear in the small, daily interactions. If Serafina posted a photo that got 1,000 likes, a celebratory mood would fill the house. If I came home exhausted after a 48-hour studio session, my mother would greet me with a frown. "Sylvia, darling, could you please not wear those paint-splattered clothes in the living room? You'll ruin the aesthetic." It was never, "Are you okay? Did your project go well?" It was always about the appearance of things. My reality, my stress, my exhaustion, my passion was an inconvenience to their curated world. My best friend from university, Morgan, saw it clearly. Morgan and I had bonded in the trenches of our program, surviving on caffeine and mutual encouragement. He was grounded and perceptive, and his family was loud, messy, and loving, everything mine wasn't. It's like they see your degree as a high-end accessory, something to display on the mantelpiece. He told me once after witnessing my mother cut me off mid-sentence to gush about a brand deal Serafina had landed. He wasn't being cruel, he was just stating the obvious. But hearing it from an outsider made the gilded bars of my cage feel colder and harder. The week leading up to my graduation was the crescendo of this family performance. My mother was in a frenzy of planning, not for me, but for the party she was hosting afterward. It was an elaborate affair with a guest list that read like a who's who of her and my father's social circle. She debated floral arrangements, canapés, and color schemes with more passion than she had ever shown for my final thesis project. "We need to make a statement," she said, her eyes gleaming. "Serafina's friends will all be watching. Her influence is growing, and this is a perfect opportunity to showcase our family's standards." I tried to interject, to say that it was my graduation, that perhaps I should have some say in the celebration of my achievement. She waved a dismissive hand. "Don't be silly, Sylvia. You're the guest of honor. You just need to show up and look the part. I'll handle the rest." My father, meanwhile, was focused on the networking opportunities. He'd invited several of his wealthiest clients, already priming them with stories of his brilliant architect daughter. He wanted me to have my portfolio ready to show, not out of pride, but because my talent was a new asset he could leverage. My role was to be the dutiful, intelligent daughter who proved what a fantastic stock the Morgan family was. I felt less like a person and more like a prospectus. My actual feelings about graduating, the immense pride, the relief, the nervousness about the future, were all buried under the weight of their expectations. They weren't celebrating me, Sylvia, the individual. They were launching a new product, Sylvia Morgan, the architect, a premium addition to their brand. And my sister, Serafina, floated through it all with a serene smile, occasionally offering hollow words of encouragement while simultaneously documenting every moment for her online audience. The stage was being set, the lights were being aimed, but I was beginning to realize that I wasn't the star of the show. I was just part of the set dressing. The day of my graduation dawned bright and clear, a perfect, picturesque sky that felt like a cruel joke. In our house, the atmosphere was electric with a frantic, superficial energy. My mother, Olive, was orchestrating the day like a military campaign, barking orders into her phone at the caterer while directing my father on where to place the floral arrangements for the post-ceremony party. I was a secondary concern, a doll to be dressed and positioned. "Sylvia, are you ready yet?" She called from the bottom of the stairs, her voice tight with impatience. "We can't be late. The lighting for photos is best before noon." I stood in front of my mirror, tugging at the graduation gown that felt more like a costume than a symbol of accomplishment. Underneath, I wore a simple, elegant dress I had bought for myself, one of the few things for this day that felt like my own choice. When I came downstairs, the family was assembled in the foyer, ready for their close-up. My father, Darren, looked proud, but it was the pride of a CEO unveiling a new product. My mother's eyes scanned me from head to toe, her expression critical. That dress is simple, but I suppose it will do. The gown covers it mostly." There was no "you look beautiful," no "I'm so proud of you." Just an assessment of my presentability. Then there was Serafina. My sister was a vision. She wore a stunning, designer sundress in a vibrant shade of coral that made her glow. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. She looked more like the guest of honor than I did. "Ready, big sis?" she chirped, holding up her phone to take a selfie of us. "We have to document this historic day." The ceremony itself was a blur. I remember walking across the stage, shaking the dean's hand, and holding the diploma that represented 5 years of my life. I searched for my family in the crowd and found them easily. My father was standing, clapping enthusiastically. My mother was smiling a perfectly polished, social smile. And Serafina was on her phone, her face illuminated by the screen. She was likely already posting about the event, curating the experience for her followers before it had even finished. A small, cold knot formed in my stomach. Later, Morgan found me outside the auditorium. He gave me a crushing hug that felt more genuine than anything I had received from my family all day. "You did it, Sil. You're officially an architect." He grinned, his pride for me radiant and real. "Your family throwing that massive party?" I nodded, trying to muster some enthusiasm. "Yeah, it's going to be a lot." He gave me a knowing look. "Just remember, this day is about you. Don't let them make it about them." His words were a lifeline, but I was already starting to feel myself being pulled under by the tide of my family's agenda. The party was exactly what I had expected, a perfectly staged event for my parents to show off. The house and garden were filled with their friends, colleagues, and clients. The conversation was a low hum of business deals and social gossip. I was paraded around, introduced, and prompted to talk about my thesis project, my job prospects, and my ambitions. My father would steer a wealthy client toward me and say, "Sylvia, tell Mr. Henderson about your concept for sustainable urban housing." I would comply, feeling the words turn to ash in my mouth as I realized I was just another part of his sales pitch. My mother, meanwhile, floated through the crowd, accepting compliments on tea. He party, the house, and her two beautiful, successful daughters. The moment it all shattered, the moment the gilded cage cracked open to reveal the rot inside, came about 2 hours into the party. My father clinked a champagne flute to get everyone's attention. He stood on the patio steps, beaming, with my mother, Serafina, and me positioned beside him. "Friends, colleagues," he began, his voice resonant with false sincerity. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate this momentous occasion. We are so incredibly proud of our Sylvia and her tremendous achievement." He gestured to me, and there was a polite smattering of applause. I managed a weak smile. But then his speech took a turn. "Sylvia's hard work and dedication have been an inspiration," he continued, "especially to her younger sister, Serafina." He turned and put an arm around Serafina, pulling her forward. "And today, as we celebrate one daughter's success, we are thrilled to share some wonderful news about the other." My mother stepped forward, her smile blindingly bright. "As many of you know, Serafina has been working so hard to build her own brand as a lifestyle influencer, and her dedication has paid off. We are so proud to announce that she has just been signed by a major talent agency and has landed a national campaign with a luxury skincare brand." The crowd, which had been politely attentive before, erupted in genuine, enthusiastic applause. People were cheering, congratulating a beaming Serafina. She took the spotlight effortlessly, thanking everyone, talking about her journey, and how much her family's support meant to her. My graduation, my 5 years of relentless work, had just been demoted to the opening act for her main event. I stood there, frozen, the diploma in my hand suddenly feeling like a cheap prop. They hadn't just overshadowed my moment, they had deliberately used it. They had gathered this influential audience under the pretense of celebrating me, only to launch her career. I looked at my parents, who were gazing at Serafina with a look of pure, unadulterated pride, a look I had craved my entire life and never received. In that instant, I wasn't their daughter. I was collateral. I was the bait for the trap. The knot in my stomach tightened into a block of ice. The carefully constructed facade of the perfect family didn't just crack. For me, it exploded into a million pieces. The applause for Serafina eventually died down, but the buzz of conversation that replaced it was all about her. "A national campaign? How marvelous! Serafina is going to be a star. Olive, you must be so proud." I remained on the patio steps, a ghost at my own feast. My father gave my shoulder a perfunctory pat, his attention already elsewhere. "Good work, Sylvia," he murmured, as if I had just successfully completed a minor task for him. He then moved back into the crowd, his arm firmly around Serafina, introducing her to his most important clients as the real star of the family. My mother floated by a moment later, her face flushed with victory. She noticed my stunned silence and leaned in, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "Chin up, darling. This is a big day for the whole family." My graduation party became Serafina's career announcement, I said, my voice flat and hollow. "How is that a big day for me?" She gave a little tinkling laugh that set my teeth on edge. "Oh, don't be so dramatic, Sylvia. A rising tide lifts all boats. Serafina's success reflects well on all of us. People will see what a talented family this is. Your degree, her brand deal, it all fits together perfectly." She didn't see my pain, she only saw the narrative. We were a package deal, and today's branding had been a resounding success. She adjusted a stray strand of my hair and then drifted away, leaving me alone in the wreckage of my own celebration. I looked around the garden at the smiling, laughing faces. None of them saw what had just happened. They only saw the beautiful performance my family had staged. The only person who seemed to notice was Morgan. He found me by the edge of the lawn, staring blankly at a rose bush my mother had meticulously cultivated. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly, his voice cutting through the noise. I just shook my head, unable to form words. He didn't press. He just stood beside me in silence, a solid, comforting presence. That was, he finally said, choosing his words carefully, one of the most calculated things I have ever seen. Hearing him validate my feelings, confirming that I wasn't just being dramatic, was like a gasp of air after being held underwater. They used me, I whispered, the realization hitting me with the force of a physical blow. They used my graduation. They did, he confirmed gently. And I'm so sorry, Sylvia. We stood there for another minute before I finally managed to pull myself together. I need to get out of here, I said. Just for a bit. Morgan nodded. My car is out front. I can drive us anywhere you want, or I can just cause a scene to create a diversion. Your call. A tiny, humorless smile touched my lips. Let's stick with the car for now. We slipped away without anyone noticing. My family was too busy basking in Serafina's glow to even register my absence. We drove in silence for a while, the city lights blurring past the window. We ended up at a cheap, 24-hour diner, the kind of place my mother would be horrified by. The vinyl seats were cracked, and the air smelled of stale coffee and grease. It was perfect. As I sat there, nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee, the events of the day began to replay in my mind. But this time, they were connecting to a lifetime of smaller moments, 1,000 tiny cuts I had ignored or explained away. I remembered every time my achievements were minimized, every time Serafina's smallest whim was celebrated, every time I was told to be quieter, to be less messy, to fit into the picture they had created. It wasn't just about today. Today was just the day the pattern became too obvious to deny. I started talking, and once I started, I couldn't stop. I told Morgan everything. About my mother critiquing my clothes after I'd been working for 2 days straight. About my father using my academic record to impress his clients. About how every family vacation seemed to revolve around getting the perfect Instagram shots for Serafina. About the constant, subtle pressure to be the serious one so Serafina could be the fun one, boxing us into roles that served the family's image. These weren't isolated incidents, they were a strategy. My role was to provide the substance, the proof of intelligence and hard work, while Serafina provided the sparkle, the public-facing charm. Together, we made the Morgan brand complete, but we weren't a team. I was a resource being mined for her benefit. They weren't raising 2 daughters, I said, the coffee cup trembling in my hands. They were building a portfolio. And she was the high-growth stock, and I was the stable, reliable bond that made the whole thing look secure. Morgan listened patiently, his expression a mixture of sympathy and anger on my behalf. What are you going to do? He asked when I finally fell silent. The question hung in the air. What could I do? Go back there and confront them? They would dismiss me as jealous and ungrateful. They would twist my words, gaslight me into believing I had misinterpreted everything. My mother's voice echoed in my head, "Don't be so dramatic." I felt a profound sense of exhaustion, a weariness that went bone deep. It was the exhaustion of fighting for a scrap of genuine recognition from people who were incapable of giving it. And in that moment, in that dingy diner, a new feeling began to bloom amidst the hurt and anger. A cold, quiet resolve. If I was just a part of their structure, a foundation they took for granted, what would happen if that foundation simply disappeared? The thought was terrifying, but it was also the first flicker of light I had felt all day. I wasn't an accessory. I wasn't a support beam. I was an architect. I knew how to build things. And maybe it was time I started building something for myself, far away from the gilded cage they called home. The drive back to my parents' house was silent and heavy. Morgan didn't push me to talk, he just let the quiet hang in the car, giving me the space I needed. When he pulled up to the curb, the party was finally winding down. A few lingering guests were saying their goodbyes on the perfectly manicured lawn. The house was still lit up, a beacon of superficial perfection. "You don't have to go in there tonight," Morgan said, his voice low. "You can crash at my place. My roommate's out of town." I considered it for a moment, the thought of a quiet, neutral space incredibly appealing. But then I looked at the house, at the front door I had walked through my entire life, and I knew I had to go back in. Not to confront them, not yet, but to begin. My escape wouldn't be a dramatic, shouted affair. I was an architect. It would be a plan meticulously designed and quietly executed. "Thanks, Morgan, but I need to do this," I said. "This is my site survey." He understood. Okay. But call me if you need anything. Anything at all. I walked in through the side door, slipping past the kitchen where catering staff were quietly cleaning up. The sound of my family's voices drifted from the living room. They were recapping the night's success. "Darren, did you see how impressed Mr. Abernathy was with Serafina?" My mother gushed. "He said she had real star quality." And her announcement completely overshadowed the Henderson kids' law school acceptance, my father added with a smug chuckle. "They looked absolutely sick." Serafina laughed. It was perfect timing. Everyone was already there for Sylvia's thing, so we had a captive audience. My thing? My 5 years of work, my degree, my future, it was just my thing. The casual cruelty of her words cemented my resolve. This wasn't a family I needed to fix. It was a situation I needed to exit. That night I didn't sleep. I sat at the desk in my childhood bedroom, the same desk where I had studied for exams and sketched my first designs, and I opened my laptop. I didn't draft a building, I drafted a new life. The plan had to be methodical and swift. Phase 1 was finances. My father managed a trust fund that had been set up for me by my grandparents. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was enough to live on for a year or two if I was careful. He was the trustee, which meant I needed his signature to access the principal. However, the terms stated I had full control once I was 25 or professionally employed. I was 24, but I had a job offer from a prestigious firm in a city 3 states away, an offer I had been hesitant to accept because my mother wanted me to stay local, to work for a firm she could brag about to her friends. The path was clear. I would accept the job, which would give me legal standing to dissolve my father's control over my finances. Phase 2 was logistics. I needed to separate my life from theirs, piece by piece, without raising suspicion. I started the next morning. I told my parents I was going out to celebrate with Morgan. Instead, I went to the bank and opened a new account that they knew nothing about. I arranged for my paychecks from the new job to be direct deposited there. I went to the post office and set up a P.O. box, rerouting my important mail. I spent the afternoon online, finding a small apartment for rent in the new city, signing the lease digitally. Each action was a quiet act of rebellion, a brick being laid for my new foundation. It felt both terrifying and exhilarating. I was moving with a purpose I hadn't felt in years. Over the next 2 weeks, I operated like a spy in my own home. During the day, I played the part of the dutiful daughter, deflecting questions about my job search with vague answers, letting them think I was following their script. At night, I packed. I went through my room, sorting my entire life into 3 piles: things to take, things to donate, and things to leave behind. I packed my books, my drafting tools, my clothes, my personal keepsakes. I sold my old car online and used the money to put a down payment on a reliable used one I found in the new city, arranging to pick it up when I arrived. Every sentimental object my parents had ever given me, the expensive watch for my 18th birthday, the designer handbag they insisted I carry, I left on my bed. They were props for the daughter they wanted, not possessions of the person I was. The hardest part was the emotional detachment. I had to treat my family like a client with a project that was ending. My mother would talk about redecorating my room, turning it into a more adult space. I would nod and agree, knowing I would never sleep in it again. My father would give me unsolicited advice on which local firms to apply to. I would thank him, knowing my signed contract was already saved on a secure cloud server. Serafina would complain about the pressures of her newfound fame, and I would offer sympathetic noises, feeling nothing but a vast, empty distance between us. The guilt was sometimes overwhelming. Was I being cruel? Was I overreacting? But then I would remember the feeling of standing on that patio, a prop in my own life story, and the guilt would recede, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. They had shown me my value in their world. I was simply choosing not to accept those terms. Morgan was my only confidant. We met for coffee in secret, and I would update him on my progress. He was my sounding board and my cheerleader. "You're building your escape hatch," he said, looking over my color-coded checklist. "It's the most brilliant design you've ever done." His unwavering support was the only thing that kept me from second-guessing myself. The final piece of the plan was the most difficult, getting my father's signature. I drafted an email to him, attaching the job offer and the relevant legal documents for the trust. I framed it as a simple formality. "Dad," I wrote, "I've decided to accept this position. It's a fantastic opportunity. As per the trust's terms, I need to transition it to my control now that I'm professionally employed. Could you please sign the attached forms so I can get everything set up before I start?" I held my breath and hit send. For 2 days, there was silence. I started to panic, thinking he would refuse, that he had seen through my plan. Then an email notification popped up. It was from his assistant. "Mr. Morgan has signed the documents. Please find them attached." Just like that, he hadn't even called. He had likely seen the high salary and the firm's reputation, decided it was a good reflection on him, and signed off without a second thought. He had no idea he had just signed my Declaration of Independence. The blueprints were complete. All that was left was to walk off the site. The final week felt like living in a slow-motion film. Every conversation, every shared meal was overlaid with the knowledge that it was the last. My family remained blissfully unaware, caught up in the whirlwind of Serafina's new career. The house was constantly filled with the buzz of her phone calls with agents and brand managers. My parents orbited her, their faces a permanent mixture of pride and strategic concern. I moved through this domestic theater like a ghost, my presence acknowledged but not truly seen. My quietness was interpreted as my usual studious nature, my time spent in my room as me decompressing after the stress of final exams. Their self-absorption was the perfect cover for my operations. I had arranged for a small moving company, the kind that uses unmarked vans, to come on a Tuesday morning, a time when my father would be at work, my mother would be at her weekly yoga and lunch social, and Serafina would be at a photo shoot across town. The timing was perfect. My escape was scheduled down to the minute. On Monday night, my mother announced we were having a last-minute family dinner to celebrate Serafina's first official brand post, which had gone live that afternoon and was, in her words, doing incredible numbers. The universe really did have a twisted sense of humor. We sat at the polished dining table, the same table where so many of my achievements had been downplayed and so many of my feelings had been dismissed. My father opened a bottle of expensive champagne. "To Serafina," he toasted, raising his glass. "The sky's the limit." My mother and Serafina beamed, clinking their glasses against his. They all turned to me, their expectant smiles waiting for me to join in. I raised my glass of water. "To Serafina," I echoed, my voice even, "may you get everything you deserve." They didn't catch the double meaning. They just heard the words and nodded, satisfied. To them, it was an affirmation of her brilliant future. To me, it was a quiet curse. Throughout the dinner, I listened as they planned her future, a trip to LA, a new wardrobe, the possibility of a reality show. They talked about how they would need to upgrade the home security system once Serafina became truly famous. Not once did they ask me about my job, my plans, or my future. It was as if my graduation had been the final item on their checklist for me, and now that it was ticked, they could put me back on the shelf. I excused myself early, claiming I was tired. "Of course, dear," my mother said, barely looking up from her phone, where she was scrolling through the comments on Serafina's post. "Get some rest." In my room, I did one final sweep. My boxes were neatly stacked and labeled, hidden in the back of my closet. My laptop bag was packed with all my essential documents: my birth certificate, social security card, passport, and the signed trust forms. I wrote a single, simple note and placed it in the center of my perfectly made bed. It didn't contain anger or accusations. That would only give them a drama to perform, a story to twist. It just contained facts. It read, "I have accepted a position as an architect in another city. I have transferred my trust fund, as is my legal right. I have moved out. I will not be in contact. I wish you all the best. Sylvia." There was nothing for them to argue with, nothing to misinterpret. It was a statement of fact, as cold and clean as a blueprint. I took one last look around the room that had been my gilded cage for 24 years. I felt no sadness, no nostalgia. Just a profound, quiet sense of relief. I slept for a few hours, a deep and dreamless sleep. At 5 a.m., I was up. I dressed in simple, practical clothes and carried my backpack and laptop bag downstairs. The house was dark and silent, every object in its perfect place. I walked out the front door without looking back, closing it softly behind me. The air had never tasted so fresh. The moving van arrived at 8 a.m. sharp, just as I had planned. The two movers were professional and efficient. In under an hour, my entire life, packed into 27 cardboard boxes, was loaded into the back of the van. I paid them in cash, and they drove away, heading for my new city. I was left standing on the curb with a single backpack. I walked to the local coffee shop where Morgan was waiting for me. He stood up the moment I walked in, his expression anxious. "It's done," I said, a real smile touching my lips for the first time in weeks. He pulled me into a hug. "I am so unbelievably proud of you," he whispered. We sat for a while, sipping our coffee, not saying much. There was nothing left to say. The plan had been executed. He drove me to the bus station. Taking a bus to a neighboring state where I would then pick up my new car was the final step, ensuring my departure couldn't be easily tracked. As I stood in line to board, I turned to him. "Thank you, Morgan, for everything." "You did this, Sylvia," he said. "You built your own way out. Just promise you'll call me when you get there." "I promise," I said. I boarded the bus, found a window seat, and didn't look back as it pulled away from the station. For the first time in my life, I wasn't moving toward a destination my family had chosen for me. I was moving toward my own horizon, and the only sound was the quiet hum of the engine, carrying me toward my new beginning. I learned about the aftermath in pieces, through a single, carefully controlled channel. Morgan. We had agreed that he would be my sole point of contact. He would check in on me, and he would relay any necessary information, filtering out the drama and manipulation he knew my family would attempt. The first call came 2 days after my departure. "So," he said, his voice a mix of awe and amusement, "the bomb has officially gone off." According to him, my mother had been the one to find the note. She had gone into my room on Tuesday evening to tell me about a wonderful young man she wanted to set me up with, the son of one of her wealthy clients, of course. She found the room tidy, the bed made, and the single white envelope placed perfectly in the center of the pillow. Her reaction, as Morgan later pieced it together from a frantic, tearful call he received from a mutual acquaintance my mother had contacted, was not one of concern for my well-being. It was one of pure, theatrical outrage. Her first call was not to the police, not to my friends, but to my father. Darren came home from work to a scene of controlled hysteria. My mother was pacing the living room, my note clutched in her hand, talking about how I had abandoned them and betrayed their trust. My father's reaction was apparently more practical and, in its own way, more telling. His first move was to try and log into my trust fund account. When he found himself locked out, the access denied, his anger truly ignited. It wasn't about his daughter being gone. It was about his asset having liquidated itself. Then came the performance for Serafina. They presented it to her as a tragic, inexplicable act of selfishness on my part. "Your sister has just left," my mother had apparently sobbed. "Right when your career is taking off. How could she be so cruel as to try and ruin this moment for you?" They immediately framed my departure as an attack on Serafina, another way to make my sister the center of the narrative. Serafina, true to form, made it about herself instantly. Within hours, she had posted a vague, melodramatic story to her social media. A black and white photo of her looking sadly out a window with the caption, "Family is everything. Praying for everyone going through a tough time right now. Hold your loved ones close." The sympathy and concern from her followers poured in, and she expertly played the part of the devoted sister, worried sick about her mysterious, troubled sibling. Their next step was to control the narrative externally. They began calling family friends and relatives, spinning a carefully crafted tale. To some, they said I had taken a last-minute, immersive job opportunity abroad and in my haste had forgotten to communicate my plans properly. To others, they hinted at a mental health crisis, suggesting I was unstable and had run away in a state of confusion. This version allowed them to garner sympathy while simultaneously discrediting me in advance should I ever decide to tell my side of the story. Who would believe the unstable daughter over the perfectly worried parents? Morgan told me they had even called him, my mother's voice dripping with false concern. "Morgan, have you heard from Sylvia? We are so worried. She's not herself." He played his part beautifully, feigning ignorance and promising to let them know if he heard anything. But their carefully constructed facade began to develop cracks. The first major one was financial. My grandparents, my father's parents, had always been more perceptive than my parents gave them credit for. The trust they had set up was their way of ensuring I had a measure of independence. When they heard I had left, they called my father, and they didn't buy his story about a sudden job opportunity. My grandmother, a formidable woman with a no-nonsense attitude, apparently asked him "Ni simple question. Darren, did you even know your daughter was unhappy?" The question led to a tense, heated argument that resulted in my grandparents withdrawing their significant financial support for several of my father's investment projects. It was the first time his actions had a tangible, negative consequence he couldn't talk his way out of. The second collapse came from within their social circle. The story of my sudden departure, combined with the over-the-top announcement at my graduation party, started to look suspicious to the more discerning of their friends. People began to whisper. Hadn't it been strange that Sylvia's party became Serafina's launch event? Wasn't it odd that the quiet, hardworking daughter would just vanish without a word? My mother's attempts to control the story became increasingly frantic, which only fueled the gossip. Her perfect image was starting to tarnish. She was no longer the flawless matriarch of a perfect family. She was the woman whose daughter had run away from her. The strain began to show. Morgan recounted a story he heard about my mother having a minor meltdown at her yoga club when someone asked a prying question about me. But the most significant blow was the one they never saw coming. I was the family's designated organizer, the keeper of schedules, the one who handled the unglamorous but essential life admin. I managed the family's digital accounts, paid the bills from their joint account, scheduled appointments, and remembered birthdays. I had been doing it for so long that they took it completely for granted. In my silent exit, I had simply stopped. The automatic bill payments I had set up from my own accounts years ago were canceled. The digital calendar I maintained was no longer shared. The renewal for their home insurance, the reminder for their tax appointments, the password for their streaming services, all of that information was stored in my head and on my personal, now inaccessible devices. Within a month, their perfectly ordered world began to fall into chaos. Their internet was cut off for non-payment. My father missed a crucial deadline to file an important financial document. My mother forgot her own sister's birthday, causing a massive family rift. They were like pilots who had been flying on autopilot for years, only to find themselves in the cockpit with no idea how to work the controls. The foundation I provided wasn't just emotional, it was functional. And without it, the entire structure was beginning to crumble. My new life began with the quiet hum of a refrigerator in an empty apartment. The movers had delivered my 27 boxes, and they sat like a cardboard mountain in the middle of the living room. For the first time, I was standing in a space that was entirely my own, unburdened by my mother's aesthetic or my family's expectations. The silence wasn't lonely, it was peaceful. It was the sound of a blank page, a clean slate. I spent the first week unpacking, not just my physical belongings, but my sense of self. I bought a comfortable, oversized couch instead of a stylish, sculptural one. I painted one wall a deep, calming shade of blue, a color my mother would have called garish. I arranged my books on the shelves in an order that made sense to me, not for how they looked. Every small choice was an affirmation of my own identity. My new job was everything I had hoped it would be. The firm was innovative and collaborative, and my ideas were not only heard but celebrated. My boss, a senior architect named Maria, was a brilliant and supportive mentor. She judged me on the quality of my work, the strength of my designs, and the passion in my voice when I presented my ideas. There were no ulterior motives, no hidden agendas. My professional value was just that, professional. It wasn't tied to my family's name or used as a tool to impress others. I worked hard, often late into the night, but it was a different kind of exhaustion than the one I had felt at home. This was the satisfying fatigue that comes from building something you believe in. It was fulfilling. I kept in regular contact with Morgan. He was my rock, my connection to the past, but on my own terms. He would tell me stories of my family's slow unraveling with a kind of detached amusement. He told me that my father had tried to hire a private investigator to find me, but without any evidence of wrongdoing on my part, there was nothing they could do. I was an adult who had legally moved and chosen not to share my address. They had no power over me. He also told me that Serafina's career, which had been launched with such fanfare, had started to stall. Without my quiet, background support managing her schedules and proofreading her contracts, she started missing deadlines and making unprofessional mistakes. Her brand, it turned out, was as shallow as the praise my parents heaped upon it. The skincare company she partnered with eventually dropped her for a more reliable influencer. The perfect image was proving to be unsustainable without its invisible support system. I never reached out to them and they were never able to reach me. I had a new phone number, a new bank account, a new address. I was a ghost to them. About a year after I left, Morgan told me something that showed me just how little they had changed. My grandparents, having completely cut ties with my father, had tracked me down through a professional architecture guild I had joined. They sent a letter to my office. It was a simple, heartfelt apology for not seeing the true nature of the situation sooner, and an invitation to reconnect on my terms. I met them for lunch a few weeks later. They were older and sadder, but their love for me felt real and unconditional. They told me that my parents had tried to use their reconciliation with me as a way back in. My mother had called my grandmother, suggesting a big family reunion to heal all the wounds. My grandmother had shut it down immediately. My parents didn't want to heal, they wanted to regain control. They hadn't learned a thing. Years have passed now. I am a project lead at my firm, managing designs for community libraries and sustainable housing projects. My work feels meaningful. I live in a home I designed myself, a small, light-filled space with a messy garden and a comfortable couch. Morgan moved to my city a few years ago, and our friendship is one of the cornerstones of my life. I have built a new family, one of choice, not obligation, made up of friends who see me for who I am. I occasionally see news of my family online. Serafina is still trying to be an influencer, but her audience is small. My parents still maintain their big house, but from what I hear, it feels empty, the silence punctuated by bitterness and blame. They shattered my big day, thinking they could use my light to make my sister shine brighter, but they misunderstood the fundamentals of architecture. You can't build a lasting structure on a faulty foundation. By treating me as the invisible, unappreciated support, they made their own collapse inevitable. They didn't just lose a daughter, they lost the one person who was holding the whole hollow thing together. And as for me, I finally got to do what I was trained to do. I cleared the toxic site, drafted a new set of plans, and built a life with an unshakable foundation. My own.